Good evening, everyone. We've already got a good number of people logged on tonight, so I appreciate your participation and your effort to get here and to join us in this. Good to see everybody. Lots of y'all checking in, and lots of familiar faces and also some new folks around. So just a delight to have you with us as we're talking about some pretty important topics. So I guess I'm going to go ahead and move on and start kind of introducing what my topic's going to be tonight. So let me move on over to my slides setting. There we go. Want to go ahead and mention, and I'll try to mention again later, if you want to get reminders of when class is about to go live, you can go to that URL I have here on the screen, KC, there it is, trying to move backwards here, rmd.at/KC midweek. And so yeah, I would love to have you sign up for those. And what will happen is on Wednesdays, usually about 6:30, I try to remember to send out a text just to say, hey, class is going live at 7 o'clock. Don't forget to log on. And Whitney, it is good to have you and your sister. I'm guessing Katie is your sister. So good to have y'all with us. And all right. Let me keep moving. But yeah, go ahead and go to that URL if you would like to get those reminders. It's pretty easy to set up. Tonight, we're going to be talking about warning signs. I will say vast majority of the content of what we're going to be covering in this class will center around productive, healthy things you can be doing in your marriage and relationships. So vast majority of this class is going to be focused most weeks on like, what are the good, healthy things to do? We're going to make some applications to that tonight. However, this is the night we're going to be talking a little bit more about troubled spots, and I'm calling it warning signs. When you see certain behaviors present, very important to work on getting past the issue, getting around the behavior, modifying the behavior, because certain behaviors really can be very destructive. You know, everyone's got their own statistics about, you know, for every really negative encounter you have, how many positive encounters does it have to kind of overbalance that? I mean, you could just think about it in your profession. You know, I can speak as a minister, but I'm sure most of you have the experience where, you know, I could have 20 people after church tell me they really appreciated what I had to say. But if I have one person really rake me over the coals, guess what's the one I'll be dwelling on all afternoon? You know, it's hard to let go of the negative and to hang on to the positive, even when the positive is overwhelmingly what you've received. But it's that way in our relationships too, isn't it? Where if you've got a strong negative, it has this way of kind of clouding out all the other thoughts that we wish we would dwell on more of the time. And so, anyway, we're going to be talking tonight about some of the more negative things we want to be careful about. And I mentioned the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking more about people who are not yet in a committed relationship or not married, but are just thinking about what's the kind of person that I would be seeking. In putting these classes together, wanted to try and have a little something for everyone. So we're going to spend a couple of weeks talking about making good choices in who you pick and how you pick. So we'll talk more about that. I want to invite you as we get started. You may remember the story about King David and his wife, Michal. Michal was Saul's daughter. So remember King Saul, the first king of Israel. He looked kingly. He had that air about him. He was like head and shoulders taller than everyone else. Everyone, when they saw that this was the first king, said, oh, this is a great choice. You know, this guy is totally kingly. And he was not a good king. So King David followed him, but meanwhile, somewhere along the way, David gets to marry Saul's daughter, Michal. And there is a really negative encounter between them. And I just want to invite you as we get started, be thinking, as we read through some of the details of this story, go ahead and type in the comments, what do you see as a red flag? There's a bunch of them going on here between David and Michal. So let's look at a couple of verses. And again, as you see something, comment. I'd love to hear from you. It says, so the circumstance is they are bringing the Ark of the Covenant back home to Israel. It had been taken and they are getting it back. And as this is supposed to be and was the place where the presence of God actually dwelled. I mean, the Ark of the Covenant is very holy, very significant. And so getting it back was a huge, huge deal. And appropriately, they are celebrating the return of the Ark of the Lord and therefore also the true, indwelling presence of the Lord in their midst. So it says, wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might. So he's not got on all the kingly garments. He's kind of stripped down to just something kind of free flowing and athletic, something that he could move around in. While he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sounds of trumpets. So David has put aside any kind of pretenses about himself or his importance. And in that moment, he is just rejoicing. And specifically, it's a kind of rejoicing for the Lord, that he is just so excited to see the presence of God so central to what his kingdom is going to be like. So yeah, he's acting in some ways, you could say, like a commoner. He's just one of the people who's a child of God celebrating the presence of God. And he's doing that, dancing around in a linen ephod with all his might. So he's really going at it. It says, as the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. We're going to look at a few more verses, but take just a second and let some of those soak in. What do you see as some red flags going on here? Already there's some stuff we could look at. David is joining the celebration. Michal is watching from a window, and when she sees David, the king, her husband, acting in this way, it kind of lets you know she was a palace brat, right? Like, she grew up as a child of privilege, and the idea of getting down to the level of the commoner we're going to see is, boy, she is not okay with that. So she's watching, not participating, not celebrating, and when she sees what he does, she despises him in her heart. Those are some pretty strong words. So again, what do you see in this passage as red flags that someone ought to be careful about? And so, skipping down a few verses, it says, when David returned home to bless his household, so he's in a good mood, going to do a good thing. Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, how the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, going around half naked in full view of the slave girls of his servants as any vulgar fellow would. So there's something interesting. David said to Michal, it was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor. And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children till the day of her death. So there's some details in that story that are left unstated, but they're certainly implied in terms of what's happening with them, their level of intimacy, and all of these things. So talk to me about some red flags here. What would you say, looking at their relationship? Look at the way that discussion unfolded. What are some behaviors that you would say, ooh, I wouldn't handle it that way? Because after all, it's easy just to read this story and say, well, I'm going to side with David because David's God's person and he's the godly king, and he's kind of celebrating the right thing. But this is his wife, and even though I would say in this occasion, I'm inclined to think she's kind of wrong in how she's looking at things. If the goal is preserving a marriage, building a family, I think both of them had some participation in this discussion that we could probably afford to tweak a little bit if the goal was marital unity and building a healthy family. So yeah, what do we got here? Joe has pointed, okay, good. My comments are starting to roll in here. So Joe is saying she doesn't love him. Maybe she loves the status of being with him more than she cares about him. That's interesting. Sarcasm. Yeah, I tell you, over the years, I find it less and less endearing when a person brags that they are fluent in sarcasm, because it just doesn't, it just hardly helps anything most of the time. Works well in comedy movies, but in terms of your actual relationships, sarcasm often not a real beneficial thing. We're going to say some more about that in a few minutes. Yeah, she doesn't love him, and Joseph says it appears he kind of doesn't love her that much either. And the way that he responds to her, and notice, he takes some other wives for himself, but notice how quickly he just kind of says, "Oh, I'm sorry you're bothered. All those slave girls you're so worried about, they think I'm great." He's got a little bit of arrogance, I would say, going on here. She is jealous. She put him down, and she criticized him in public. Yeah, that's right. That's a good point, Cheryl, because it wasn't just, would you please come home so we can talk about this? It was, she goes out to meet him and accosts him and is demeaning toward him, right? And you see the sarcasm dripping in her initial statements. Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Easter Bell. No love lost between them to start with. Anyway, it was arranged. Yeah, arranged marriages not common in our setting these days. There are parts of the world where they're still common, and some people do really great at picking partners for their spouse. Some people don't do so well at picking their own. Some arranged marriages are really terrible and miserable, like the old fairy tale stories we read and see movies about with the princess who doesn't want to marry that guy and whatever. But I've known several people and seen stories of people who were in arranged marriages and say it couldn't have worked out any better. They're so happy. So it's kind of a mystery exactly how all that works when you come together. I think it does make the point that what matters most is what we're willing to put into a relationship, as opposed to like finding your quote unquote soulmate, right? Like there's something to be said for how much we work together. Let's see. Yes, so we have one Facebook user who is unbeknownst to me, but just the same. She seems jealous. Yeah, there's some jealousy. And notice he's really digging at her, too, about her dad. Oh, by the way, yeah, I was dancing not before these slave girls, but before the Lord. The same Lord that picked me over your dad, who's dead now. It's really, it's pretty rough. It's pretty rough. Implication that she doesn't honor God as David does. Yeah, and so it's certainly an implication, Sandy. I wonder... I'm not completely sure what we would say about the reality of that, right? Like, does deep down, is she also someone who's concerned about God and just feels like it's her role to act more dignified or something? I don't know. But she doesn't seem to be coming from a great place here. And there's the implication. David certainly implies it. And you wonder if, whoever's writing this story down is trying to portray her as kind of an unvirtuous person, or, like not that much of a God-focused person. She is really worried about status, which is not always something that's going to help you along in your faith. If you're worried about putting yourself first, how do you put God first? Anyway, great comments, and feel free to keep weighing in as we go. So that to me is an interesting story about a marriage where clearly some things are going badly. And even though, he doesn't divorce her, but functionally speaking, right, like that marriage is over. Like, so I guess she's still living in the palace, but there's nothing happening between them. He's just, sustaining her, but there's no real love that's kindled between them. Yeah, before David was king, Michal helped him escape from... That's right. That is that story. So there was some love there, right? At least initially, she's infatuated with him. She helps him out, maybe took pity on him. So yeah, it's complex. So we want to be careful not to just entirely make her the bad guy in this, even though she doesn't seem to be the super faithful wife we want her to be, perhaps. So that was my question. What are the red flags that you see in this story? You've gotten some good comments as we go. Also want to mention, if you tuned in a few minutes into this, we're here on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. And right now we're doing a study for several weeks talking about relationships, how we can strengthen relationships. I would invite you, if you haven't already, please like our Facebook page, King's Crossing COC. If you go to facebook.com/King's Crossing COC, the King's Crossing Church of Christ, would love to have you like our fan page. And if you want, follow us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm going live both here and there simultaneously, so I would be glad to have you there. That's good. Yeah, perhaps she is hedging her bets. Yeah, she's seen one king go out of power, so maybe she's watching her back there, Joe. Who knows? So here's a scripture I thought was an interesting one to apply to a covenant type relationship. Do two walk together unless they have agreed to meet? Now, that's not exactly the context in which Amos is giving this statement. There's some other stuff going on in Amos, but I thought that is just a principle, is an interesting one to reflect on. The two walk together unless they have agreed to meet. What does it take especially for a marriage relationship, to grow and to flourish over time? For you to flourish together, you have to meet in the middle. You have to be determined to make that work. You have to be willing to sacrifice to make that work. You have to invest yourself in such a way that you have a lot at stake in the relationship. You do all of that, and there's a much better possibility of things moving in a good direction. But do two walk together unless they have agreed to meet? Because if you're on different pages, you're not sharing your goals, you're not doing this together, it's an awful lot harder to make it work well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to draw from a couple of different resources as I go through this class. Tonight, I'm going to be pulling especially from the Gottman's The cover of this book is actually green, but since I'm on a green screen, it looks purple right now. Yeah, so there's a lot of helpful stuff in here. The book is The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. I'm going to be drawing a lot of ideas in future weeks as we talk about things that are helpful. Tonight I am drawing, in fact, I'm not even using all of his list of warning signs, red flags that we want to be careful about. I'm just going to pull from 4 of them. I wanted to make sure I had time to get through everything. The Gottmans I have mentioned before at church. It's fascinating. They're considered the best relationship research firm in the country. They have like their whole house where they will invite a family who's who they're studying or who's having problems to come and actually just like live in the house over the weekend. And they, in all the appropriate places, they have cameras, microphones, and they just observe them. But they'll tell you some of the statistics in the book. It's a haunting statistic, but what they'll do is they'll get a couple and say, well, hey, you're having problems. We want you two to bring up and argue about, have a real engagement on a topic that's one of your hot button topics, and we're just going to watch you. And after letting a couple argue, I think it's for like 15 minutes, they can predict with 95% accuracy whether they will stay married or divorce. And that's a terrifying thing to think about on the front end, right? Like they could look for certain warning things and just kind of lay out the list and say, oh man, this one doesn't look good. So I don't want you to hear the warning signs and get immediately discouraged, because the positive side of this is because they figured out what causes relationships to crash and they figured it out so accurately, they're also wonderful at telling you what helps it to work well. So there is a very positive side to what we're looking at tonight. But these are some things they would say in a relationship you want to be really careful with. It is not the case that if you see one of these signs, you're just instantly doomed. In fact, I would say most marriages, I don't want to give too many details, I would say even in my own, occasionally, you will see some of these things rear their head. You're having a really bad day, or he or she's having a really bad day, and you just say some stuff or do some stuff and you kind of let yourself go further than you meant to. Like we all have some bad days sometimes, and that's part of it. But so just because you see some of these behaviors present, don't take that to mean this is the end. But I think I would say if you allow these things to become your ongoing companions in your relationship, these constant wedges, it would really be something to be concerned about. So I think they make this point, and I would affirm this point: the ways in which we argue are of greater importance than the frequency with which we argue. So it would be a temptation to say, well, a couple who argues all the time is just clearly having a lot of problems. What's actually more important than that is how their arguments end. Do you actually resolve the things you're engaging about, or do you end angry, turning away from each other? So you could have a couple that's barely arguing, but what they're doing is actually just repressing everything and refusing to talk about it, which could end up being way less healthy than engaging about it. Charlie Seibert is kind of a church leadership guru up at the ACU, passed away a few years ago, but he was kind of like Yogi Berra. He had all these good, memorable quotes, but one of his quotes that has stuck with me is he will say, if you want to have less conflict, you've got to have more conflict. If you want to have less conflict, you got to have more conflict. And what he means is, if there's really some stuff that's a problem, you need to get it out on the table and deal with it and talk about it and work through it and have that conflict, and then you can have peace. But if there's conflict and you're all trying to pretend it doesn't exist or just grit your teeth and ignore it, that's when you really got a problem. So the way in which we argue is much more important than the frequency with which we argue. So if you're having lots of heated discussions, but they're ending well, that doesn't necessarily mean anything bad for your relationship. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, says, this is an interesting quote too, conflict creates the fire of affects and emotions. And like every fire, it has 2 aspects, that of burning and that of giving light. That of burning and that of giving light. Sorry, I have tried to disable my notifications, but if you're text messaging me right now, it is going to come through on the screen. Sorry about that. So think about this quote. Fire burns and it gives light. So the problem with conflict in a relationship, conflict does feel like the burning, right? Like you feel your blood pressure rise, you start sweating, you get tense, you have adrenaline that kicks in, like there's the burning. But the fact that conflict is happening may also illuminate something else. So it's important to pay attention to What is it that we're fighting about? Why are we fighting? When we're fighting, what's going on around us, what happened just before it, what happens after it. Let that conflict illuminate the other aspects of your relationship, and you might learn something valuable. You might even find some really productive paths forward that not only get past the conflict, but lead you to a deeper connection than what you had before. So conflict, it gets you riled up. There's the burning aspect, but there's also the light that it brings with it as well. So worth trying to engage. And yeah, getting a couple of good quotes in here. Not 50-50, but 100%, 100%. That's right. Yeah, and you're talking about ignoring the elephant in the room. And doesn't make the elephant go away, does it? Here's a good one. Dirty laundry best handled privately, not in public. Thank you, Brenda. And nobody likes to be corrected publicly. Nobody does. And that's classic Dale Carnegie thing, right? But that was something my dad always taught me when I was little. He said, if you have a problem with someone, and I've made the mistake a few times where, I saw a teacher was just totally wrong on something, I would just raise my hand and say, hey, I know you put this and this on the test, but that's not true. It's this and this. Believe it or not, that didn't work well a single time. Even though I was positively, demonstrably right, it didn't persuade them of anything. Yeah, nobody likes to be corrected or dealt with negatively in public. Nobody likes to lose face, right, Brenda? We want to feel like we have some decency and are worthy of respect, and we should treat other people the same way, not just our spouses, but everyone. And so, for that reason, I will try. If I have to correct someone publicly, I do it as absolutely gently as I can find a way to. But yeah, if you just raise your hand and say, yeah, you're wrong about that. Yeah, they've already got their back bowed up, and even if they are wrong, they'll probably persist in the error, right? Got to be cautious about dirty laundry in public. So here's one of the first red flag warning signs. One of the first things that we have to be careful about is how we start up a heated discussion. So if you're about to have conflict, if you're mad about something and you're going to address it, be very thoughtful about how you start the conversation. If you start up harshly, if you go in directly for the attack, it just generally doesn't end all that well. So an example, some of the books I've been looking at, we're talking about these principles, and we're mentioning, we're going to get to this too, Sandy. Sometimes only one spouse wants to talk and the other clams up. In those situations, it's important to say, hey, we really do need to talk about this. So let me know, what is the time in a little while that we can and will discuss this. You're right. Yes, some people do clam up. We're going to talk about that behavior in a little bit. So, for example, one couple who's in counseling comes in and they've got several points of conflict, and they say, well, what's an area that you're fighting over? He says, well, it seems like we end up fighting a lot about housework. We probably ought to talk about the housework. And the wife says, oh, you mean the lack thereof? Eye roll, like she's already on the attack and kind of insulting him, right? It's a very harsh way to start. And he kind of doesn't even have anything to say, right? Like he's maybe not doing that great at it, and he kind of feels bad about it. But then she starts preaching at him. Well, I've given you lists. I've tried writing it down. I tried letting you know, tried letting you do it all on your own, but nothing ever gets done. And of course, look at the implication behind what she's saying. The way that she's phrasing all of that is the actual problem, the housework. The way she's talking, he's the problem, right? You see that subtlety there? Even though they're arguing about housework, what she's really doing is just going in with guns blazing and saying he's the problem. No matter what I do, nothing gets done. He doesn't do anything. Oh, the lack thereof. There's some of that sarcasm we were talking about. So that would be an example of a harsh startup and something that would be, I think, rather unhelpful. So this is interesting. The Gottmans have found 96. Okay, this is a high statistic. 96% of the time, you can predict the end of a conversation based on the first 3 minutes of the interaction. This is why a gentle startup is so important. You can look at the first 3 minutes of a conversation, and if you go into an argument with guns blazing and you go in harsh, even if you make some repair attempts and you try to make nice somewhere in the middle of the conversation, the person who you attacked is still going to remember that they got attacked more than they hear anything else. That's the part that sticks. And so probably the conversation won't end well. And again, no matter how many attempts you make in, say, the next 15 minutes of the conversation, if in the first 3 you're on the attack, you've already basically, both of you lose, right? Like nobody really wins an argument. If it's someone who you're connected to, especially like your spouse, when the two of you are to be one person, there's no such thing as winning an argument, because if you really try to harm the other person, whether it's emotionally, physically, whatever, if you're trying to harm the other person, you can't do that without also harming yourself, because they're part of you. So both of you lose when you argue really harshly. But the first 3 minutes determine most of how a conversation is going to go. So you want to give yourself the best possibility of success in a heated topic. Start by taking a few deep breaths and begin gently and rationally and say, this is an issue. Can we try to talk about this issue? And keep it about the issue. Don't make the personal attack so much. But harsh startup, very bad. Criticism, sarcasm are terrible ways to start off. And this is partly because sarcasm is a form of contempt, isn't it? When Michael expresses to David, oh, how you've dignified yourself, right? Like it already told us, she's despised him in her heart. And sarcasm is a way of really saying, I kind of hate you, right? Like it's very derisive. So that's a first warning sign to be cautious about. Yeah, the tip of an iceberg, right? Oh man, Joe, this is a good point. All of this applies with your kids. Yeah, this is a class about relationships, and anyone you connect with, that's a relationship. So this is valuable for marriage, certainly true in all of your other connections as well. So yeah, you start off by going on the attack on your kid. They may have to submit to you to some degree. At some point, they'll grow out of that. But yeah, you start off harshly, they're probably going to close their ears really quick. So important to be gentle and gracious. All right, so the second warning sign, this is where we're going to spend the most time tonight. I thought about making these 4 be the whole class, just because there's so much to talk about here. But the 4 horsemen, the Gottmans call them, the 4 horsemen, drawing imagery from, like among other places, the book of Revelation, which are, symbolic of the apocalypse, the coming apocalypse, right? Like everything's about to go badly. Yeah, these are going to be 4 aspects. And the Gottmans say, you want to watch what kind of a startup people use when they argue. So how do you start your heated discussion? But then these are 4 elements where if you invite these into your relationships, boy, these are not good companions to keep around. These will really wreak havoc on your relationships. The first of these is criticism. And it's important to distinguish between making a criticism versus making a complaint. So a complaint would be something like this. I am really frustrated that you didn't wash the pans last night. We agreed it's a problem if we leave all the food on them. They were dirty. You knew they were dirty. We agreed we were going to take turns. I did them the other night. You didn't do them last night. It was your turn. Would you please go ahead and do it and get it done? And so it's actually fine to do something like that because it communicates a few things. Number one, how I'm feeling, right? Like we're not starting with a you statement, everything that's wrong with you. We're starting with, this is kind of how I'm feeling. I'm frustrated. This is what I'm feeling right now. And here's a specific problem, right? It's not all pans at all times, you've never done anything, because that's probably not true, right? It's probably not the case your spouse has never done anything helpful. But yeah, so starting with what you're feeling and also the specific situation. The specific problem is, last night you didn't wash the pans like you knew you were supposed to and had agreed to do. And then you express what it is you are needing, wanting, or preferring. Would you please do it now? That's a fine thing to say. And that is a complaint. That is different than a criticism. So notice again, complaint, specific, tied into what I'm feeling and what happened and how it makes me feel. There's no disparaging of the person's character or anything like that. A criticism would go more like this. Why do you never try to remember things? I hate having to wash all the pans when you know it's your turn. You just don't care. So there's a criticism. What's different about this? Criticisms, number one, are considered like global and universal. You never remember things, right? It's just a general, I give you no credit for anything you do, which doesn't ever help an argument move along, does it? Like no credit whatsoever for the good. You don't ever help with things. You don't remember things. I don't know why you don't even try. You just don't care. I've found in general, there are a few things that irritate me more than when another person, like I don't mind if you want to critique my actions. Like I did something that affected you in a certain way. Well, tell me what it is. If appropriate, certainly I'll own it and I'll apologize for it. don't try to tell me what was going on in my heart or my intentions when I did something, because you don't know, right? Even if they were bad, you don't have a way of knowing that. And so you don't get to say what's going on behind another person's eyes up in their mind. So got to be careful about that kind of behavior especially. But criticisms are global, universal. They're kind of unspecific, just in general, you're not helpful. And then they express negative opinions about intrinsic qualities of the other person, such as their character, their intelligence, their personality. It's a personal attack that's just kind of universal. And how do you even, you don't feel like you can recover from that, right? Like, how do you defend yourself against something like that other than to say, either, no, I'm not, or you just fire back at the other person. But again, the difference between a complaint, which is specific, situational, provides a step forward, speaks to how I'm feeling based on what happened, as opposed to a criticism, which is just clearly the feelings are all there. I mean, you could have the very same feelings, but you could word those in those two different directions and get a very different response. So complaints, useful. Criticisms, destructive. Be careful about criticisms. Here's another example. A complaint would say, there is no gas in the car. I'm upset that you didn't fill it up like you said you would. Could you please deal with it tomorrow? So again, specific situation. Here's how I'm feeling about it. You said you were going to do this. You didn't do it. Tomorrow, would you please take care of it? The criticism would be, why don't you ever remember anything? I told you 1,000 times to fill up that tank and you didn't. You're just so careless. Again, you see the difference between how those feel as they're given to you. A complaint, it's still, it's a negative engagement, but it's also got redemptive possibilities. Criticisms are attacks. So be cautious about welcoming criticism into your relationships. Second of the four horsemen is contempt. And these kind of build on each other, okay? Contempt arises from an expressed sense of superiority over one's partner. It is an intentional disrespect and belittling. So here's behaviors like name calling, when you call them, insulting names, when you roll your eyes at them, when you mock them and deride them, hostile humor, try to laugh at their expense, but not like laughing with them, laughing as a way to kind of hurt them, to have like a sense of victory that they've had to be diminished somehow in front of you. But all of these behaviors are things that communicate disgust. And so I'm frustrated with you, and I have a lot of creative ways of letting you know that I feel negatively towards you, but not offering a path forward per se. So there was one conversation recorded with a husband and wife, and this husband was demonstrating quite a bit of contempt. And so he and his wife are arguing money. We're going to talk about money one week, but that's, for a lot of families that have marital stress, money is usually one of those big topics. It just is. So much depends on how much you've got and how you use it, and it affects everybody in your household. So anyway, husband and wife are having some points of conflict, and he finally says, one of the things that bothers him, he said, you're spending a fortune because you pay and go to this expensive car wash and get your car washed. He says, I have to wash my own car, and I think it's the most spoiled thing you do. So there's kind of an insult, right? I think you're acting like a spoiled person because you go to that fancy car wash and get someone else to wash your car. I'll wash my car myself because I'm saving us money, and look at the way you're just throwing money away on that kind of thing. And so the wife responds actually kind of gently and says, it's a little hard for me to do. I've got kind of a small build, a lot of parts of the car. It's hard for me to reach. Do you think maybe you could help me wash the car? I'm willing to try, but I could use your help. I would appreciate it. And he says, oh, well, how many times have you helped me wash my car? She says, well, I would help you if you want to consider that. I would help you wash your car, and then maybe you could help me wash my car. He said, no, that wasn't my question. How many times have you actually done it so far? It's pretty clear at some point, this guy's not even really trying to solve the issue. What he's trying to do is to see her diminished. So you see how that derision comes in, that contempt comes in, and how does she fix that? What does she do? At some point, do you see how he starts turning the corner where really it's kind of like he doesn't want a resolution to the problem because he wants to win the argument, or he wants to, again, feel superior to her and how she is. Oh, you're just spoiled. You're blowing the money, but look how good and virtuous I am. That's kind of the implication there. Got a couple of comments coming in. Yes, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. Very good. Very good. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. Yes, inappropriate to use generalizations because they're rarely true. Never use never or always. Yeah, never and always in an argument as part of an accusation almost always kind of render the argument useless because you're stating something that's clearly absurd, right? Of course, it's not the case that I never do anything good for you. Like, it's just not the case. Very good. Thank you, guys. So there's an example of contempt and what it looks like. Contempt is often fueled by these long, simmering negative thoughts. So there is something that's weighing on me, bothering me, and I just continue to let it simmer. And when we don't resolve the issue or the differences, the negative feelings have a way of worsening. So it's like the longer they sit there, the smellier they get, right? Like you need to deal with them. By not dealing with them, they actually get worse. And then you start to turn the corner on some of this stuff with contempt as opposed to just offering a complaint or even criticism, right? You can see how criticism starts leading into contempt. So because you've criticized me so much, I start feeling a sense of moral superiority over you. And then when I get mad at you and I start being harsh toward you and I want to, diminish you through my words, I feel kind of this, self-righteousness in how I'm doing it. Okay. That guy is a jerk. Ron says, don't get mad at him and stop projecting. Yes, very good. Don't get mad at him and stop. Thanks. Very good. So the purpose of contempt in a discussion is not to actually resolve the issue, but to demean the other person, right? Winning an argument but hurting your spouse, it means you didn't win at all. You just hurt both of you. Contempt is a way to insult and I would call it psychological abuse. Contempt is a way to insult and psychologically abuse your partner. It's really damaging. And contempt, when present, think about this. I mean, this is really true. When it's present, it has a way of blocking out most positive emotions that partners would otherwise feel about each other. And it is the case, like a person you choose to marry, a person who's like one of your closest friends or your parents or your children, like these people in your life, you value them dearly. How can a person, think about it. The people in your life who can make you the most angry are usually the ones you love the most, right? Because you're vulnerable to them. So there might be real love and affection there. And there could be a 1,000 examples of good behavior. But if what you've experienced was contempt, it's like all of a sudden it just glazes over and it's the only thing you'll think about. So expressing contempt towards another person in discussion, trying to belittle the person, even if you're in the right and they're in the wrong, intentional efforts to harm them with your words, with your demeanor, your eye rolls, whatever it is, it just doesn't make anything better. Again, that happening from time to time in your relationship doesn't mean it's doomed, but that's not a companion you want to keep in your family very much. And here's an interesting detail. Couples who are contemptuous of each other are more likely, it's been proven, to suffer from infectious diseases than other people. So if for no other reason than your selfish desire not to contract COVID, don't show contempt to people, because your contempt weakens you and it weakens them. So where there's contempt present, it actually does just kind of dry the bones, weaken the soul. It really hurts the person. So be careful about contempt. Instead, I would suggest Ephesians 4:29, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. What a great twist on the danger of contempt. Think about, what can I say that is wholesome, that is helpful, that builds up? What can I say that really speaks to something they're needing to hear? If you are in a relationship with a person who dearly needs words of affirmation, it doesn't matter if you're not real good at expressing yourself. The fact that you're trying will go such a long way. But according to their needs, what an important phrase in that verse. What is it that they're really needing? Do you know them well enough to where you actually know what's even bothering them right now? Are you talking to them enough about their life and their day and how things are going and how work's going and what's been weighing on you with the kids? How do you feel we're doing? If you're really engaging in those conversations, hopefully you would know, what are their needs right now? What are the things I could do even creatively that would help make his or her life a little better? You want to say things that genuinely benefit those who listen. So the fact that I'm moving my mouth and talking, I think that's a great starting point for communicating at all. Generally speaking, this is coming from a person who's introverted, and if I'm in a class setting, like I don't mind teaching a class because I have some degree of control, right? But if I'm sitting in someone else's class, it's my typical behavior that I barely comment at all, because I would always say, I think a person should only speak when me speaking improves upon silence. And often it's not easy to do that. So what can I say that is genuinely beneficial to those who are listening? Yes, this is all good. Brenda, you're exactly right. A well-worded complaint is more likely to get a better response. It may correct the problem, but criticisms often result in people getting defensive, and that's exactly right. Let's see. Randall's asking, is it my contempt for another or my knowledge of another person's contempt for me that weakens my immune system? Randall, I don't remember in that statistic. It was just a brief little blurb, right? I don't know which of those is worse. I would say avoid both. Avoid both. Try not to be around people who openly show contempt for you, and try not to ever do that to another person. Honor God with your words, Sandy says, and she's right. Randall says, I'm never talking again. Okay. Yeah, you can take the silence thing too far, because sometimes a person does need to speak a word and to say something. And often speaking does improve upon being silent. Jody made me a yummy tuna fish sandwich, which in some circles could be a contradiction of terms. Interesting. Okay, Joe. I don't know where you're going with that. Maybe you're commenting on someone else's post. I see all of your comments in a specific, just like one after another kind of feed. All right, let me keep moving here. Yeah, still got some time. Defensiveness. This is getting back to your comment, Brenda. Defensiveness would be the next of the four horsemen. This is more sinister than you would assume it is when people start getting defensive, because defensiveness can be used as a way of actually blaming your partner. So the most common form of a destructive kind of defensiveness is what they would call the innocent victim card. So you take this stance where you just say you're the most innocent person, you're just getting beat up on, and so you kind of wrap it all up in a whiny package, but what you're really kind of saying is, oh, this other person's such an aggressor. So why are you always picking on me? What about all the good things I do? There's just no making you happy. So that would be an example of the innocent victim defensive mode. And again, when you're doing it, it's a way of trying to act virtuous, isn't it? I'm just this innocent problem. So here's the problems with defensiveness. Number one, I am completely righteous in my stance. At least I'm acting that way. I'm just an innocent person. You appreciate nothing about me. You're so hard on me. What have I ever done? Well, you might have done some stuff. You may have some really annoying behaviors. You may have done plenty of things. So when you're being defensive, you're not acknowledging that you have responsibility in this. That's the second one. You deny your responsibility. You're making excuses for whatever it is you're doing that could really be contributing to the problem. And in fact, by doing that, like, you're not really trying to solve anything, right? Just like expressing contempt is not trying to solve anything. It's trying to insult the other person. Defensiveness is more the passive aggressive way of attacking the other person, where, oh, you're just such a monster. All you're doing is adding to our misery, since I am escalating our problem rather than resolving it. So there's no suggestion on what needs to get better. They're just applying those universal things to that mean old partner that just is so mad at me, and I just can't ever get any credit for anything. So, and again, not that you don't ever really feel that way sometimes, perhaps, but defensiveness, when it's not leading to anything that's getting resolved, actually just perpetuates the problem or worsens the problem. So again, I want to say this: it isn't wrong to defend yourself. And sometimes in a heated discussion, especially when there's a misunderstanding, well, this is what you did and this is how it made me feel. Well, hold on just a second. This is maybe what it looked like to you, but you need to understand where I was coming from and why I did this and what my intentions were. So there's nothing wrong with defending yourself, but you want to try and do this without these passive-aggressive counterattacks. So it's fine to say, well, hey, I'm sorry you felt that way, but I do feel that I did this because of this. Like, it's fine to defend something, but if what you do is immediately go to the victim thing and just, wow, you're just so hard on me. You're just so hard on me. I can't believe you. So I hope you see the what I'm trying to differentiate there. But defensiveness is the third of the four horsemen to be cautious about. The fourth one of these, and someone referenced this behavior earlier, I think it may have been you, Sandy, stonewalling. So if you let the other three horsemen in and you let them come to live with you, before long, you're going to see some stonewalling. So Stonewalling is what happens where, let's say you've started a discussion harshly, someone goes in on the attack, you're expressing contempt for each other, and you express contempt, and I get defensive, and I get all self-righteous, and you're being self-righteous, and none of us admits fault, and none of us is really talking about solutions. Eventually, one of you, or maybe both of you, just turn away and tune out and go blank. And that's stonewalling. What does it look like? Something like that. Immobile facial expression. So I'm not showing rage. Instead, I go from being heated and frustrated to just tune out. Avoid eye contact, tense neck muscles, all that kind of stuff. And that's another really dangerous behavior because again, things are not ending well. Remember one of the first quotes we talked about, it's not a problem that you have a high amount of conflict in your relationship. The problem is how do your conflicts end? And if you start them up harshly, you express all these negative feelings about each other without trying to keep it specific to the issue, looking for ways to resolve the issue, and you turn away without solving anything, boy, those are some bad things to persist in. Stonewalling. Many who stonewall would actually say they are trying not to make things worse, right? You're getting me so mad right now that the only thing I know to do is just shut down. However, stonewalling is a powerful form of disapproval, icy distance, and smugness. So by me giving you the total silent treatment, ignoring you entirely, not engaging with you at all, in some ways it's also continuing to diminish you as a person. You're not worth my response, right? There's kind of that implication. And this is an interesting detail. In 85% of marriages, the first one to stonewall is the male. So what I'm talking about, and if you're a guy who struggles occasionally with going toward this behavior, 85% of the time it is the guy who does this. And so this is, they say, biologically rooted. They say that the male cardiovascular system is more reactive than that of the female and recovers more slowly from stress. And so, if you have a situation you get in where something's suddenly traumatic and someone's jarred, females, for whatever reasons, tend to be better at kind of self-talking and self-soothing, right? They can start calming their thoughts, calming themselves down, kind of doing that introspectively. For whatever reason, women do that better than men do. And so like you could compare a male and a female who've just been through some kind of a stressful stimulus, and the male will carry it with him much longer than the female will, because females are just better at kind of calming themselves down to some degree. And there's a lot of interesting studies you could go into to kind of examine some of that. But for biological reasons, men get more easily overwhelmed in marital conflict. So you get frustrated, you say, I'm trying to talk to him, and he all of a sudden just kind of goes. One of the behaviors I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about is what they would call like flushing, where all of a sudden you get so overwhelmed with angry emotions that you kind of shock the other person, where there's just this sudden explosion where you've just kind of been holding on to it and then it just goes crazy. But men get overwhelmed more easily. So, not that you have to pamper the guys, but at the same time, be thoughtful about that. Just statistically, from the time we're children until we're, grown-ups, women I would put it this way, women just have a lot more words they can use in a day. You have some guys that are highly verbal. Most of us, from the time we were children, even into adulthood, it's I can't remember the percentage, but it's a large percentage of the things that come out of our mouths are sound effects. Like we still don't use our words that much as adults. And so in an argument where there's several negative things going on, if it's getting tense, the guy is the one who's probably going to get overwhelmed by it first. That seems to happen a lot. Thank you, Sandy. I have once or twice walked away from a discussion because I knew I was too angry to discuss nicely. Right, and so the difference between that and stonewalling would be, do you at some point make sure that we try to talk about this again? Hey, I'm sorry, I was getting really frustrated and it was not productive. Could we maybe try to re-engage this? I'm sorry, I kind of was getting overwhelmed by it. It's important that we still try to resolve the things. But yeah, sometimes it is appropriate to say, hey, tell you what, this is not getting anywhere. Can we just go for a walk, or can I go for a walk, or can we take half an hour and then maybe let's go get a milkshake or some ice cream? I mean, Randy Harris has said, and I think this is true, that you can solve almost all problems in life by either like meditative silence or a chocolate chip cookie, but can we do something that puts us in a better frame of mind and maybe re-engage in a better space? But the re-engagement's very, very important. Yeah, Ron agrees with the pampering. I'll accept that. So there's some fine lines here or there, but generally speaking, you don't want it to be the case that you stonewall and never re-engage. That's a negative thing. So want to be aware of the four horsemen. Got a couple of others I'm going to try and cover quickly. A third thing to be very cautious about is what they would call failed repair attempts. So I would just ask you, whatever you're comfortable sharing, this could take a lot of different formats, but let's say you've had a negative discussion in your relationship and you're trying to get past it. What helps you repair? Like at some point, hopefully one of you starts kind of reaching back out to the other and says, hey, can I get you something to drink? Can I get you something to eat? Oh, hey, I saw this today and I thought of you. What do you think of it? At some point you try to move past whatever it was that was bothering you. I'm just curious if you could share what is something that helps with that. And repair attempts are the secret weapon to limiting the damage of the four horsemen. Again, I think every marriage certainly probably has the four horsemen present some of the time. And as Joe pointed out wisely, not just between you and your spouse, can also be between you and your kids, or any other relationship in your life. But whenever you got the four horsemen showing up, this is how we try to counteract the damage. We want to repair somehow and get back together. And what I like about this is that it can range from anything really serious, like maybe it's a sincere apology and an owning of what happened and just a really heart-to-heart talk. But so often, playfulness is one of the great ways that someone might try to repair something. So, you might think about an argument where you're kind of getting into it for a second and both of you know it could get worse than this, and then suddenly one of you sticks your tongue out at the other and the other sticks their tongue out, or maybe you whop them with a pillow or something and you kind of chuckle about it. And then all of a sudden it's okay. Like that's a repair. And so it can be a serious attempt. It could be a silly thing, but I'm just curious, like in your relationships, what helps you to repair when things are kind of getting tense? How do we get things back to where they're a little better than they were? Doesn't mean you're not still a little bothered by what you got into it about, but the repair attempts. It is so important, not just that you try to make those repair attempts, because when you're arguing, you don't want to end stonewalling. You want to end turning back toward each other. So what helps you to repair? Let's see. Scripture helps as a first step. Yeah, having a common ground that you build on. Isn't it amazing how just going to church together each week, there's so many positive benefits to that. I mean, even if it's the case that you go to church and then you leave and you just mock my sermon or whatever it was the whole time, there's something really healthy about going as a family, sitting together for an hour, singing songs. Singing's actually got a lot of positive benefits for you in a lot of different ways. And then, just trying to listen and think about something positive and maybe processing it some together in the car as you go. And again, sometimes you may love it, sometimes you didn't love everything about it, but yeah, just some of those rituals that even though we've been mad at each other this week, we still do this together, and somehow that helps us to hit reset. That's a great routine. Realizing I don't have to win is really hard to do for me. Thank you for your honesty there, Joe. Humor is very important. And there you go. The Karate Kid stance works as comedic relief. Diana, that's what I'm talking about. You're getting really mad and it's like, I ought to whop you. And then one of you goes into the crane kick and yeah, all of a sudden you're chuckling. And isn't it amazing how much that helps? You don't necessarily have to win an argument or completely resolve a problem as long as you can find a way to come back together and find something more important than what it was you were frustrated about. The fourth of these, this is good. Thank you, Cheryl. Or actually, this is Randall. Do something good for the other person. So yeah, knowing them well, what is it that would really help them? Yeah, getting lots of comments coming in here. Thanks, guys. So the other would be what I'd call bad memory dominance. So it can get to the point where we've had enough arguments where I just start keeping track of everything that's going wrong, thinking about what's going wrong, focusing on what's going wrong to the point that it's like I've lost sight of the things that are good. So it's kind of one thing after another. I'm piling on all the negative memories. And then what happens is no matter what you do, I interpret everything through the worst possible version of who you are. And so, in a healthy relationship, I mean, everybody has bad days. So it would be one thing to say like, okay, say tonight I'm really grumpy, getting in an argument with my wife. Hopefully, what would happen is in the morning, what she would be saying is, man, he was grumpy last night. The way if you're framing it and saying, hey, that was kind of that was one particular night and that was a rough night. It's a different thing to say, based on the way he's acting, he probably hates me. He probably doesn't even want to be here anymore. In fact, now that I think of this other thing he did the other day, I wonder what he really meant. What did he really mean by that? And he probably was thinking, you start piling all this stuff up and you focus on all the negative. And when you let that dominate, that's a really deadly behavior for your relationship. It is hard to reconnect and heal if a couple continues to dwell on all that is wrong rather than to seek connections on what good things they share. For that reason, good to, people talk about habits for gratitude, writing down things you're thankful for, talking about things you're thankful for. You want to connect so that you have the positives to hang on to. There was a phase for a while where Carolina and I were like, we just need to talk more, really talk, like before we go to sleep or something. So we got in the habit for a while of just at the end of the day, we would have it was a quick conversation, but it was, tell me something that was kind of hard for you today and tell me something that you really enjoyed today. Like in fact, we started abbreviating. Like, what was your bad thing today? What was your good thing today? And at least sharing in that goes a long way. But need to always keep the good things in front of you as well, because otherwise you might forget about so many of them. 1 Corinthians 13 expresses this. Love does not dishonor others. There's that contempt problem, that defensiveness problem. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. And I know some people, that is a huge struggle. But if you always keep track of everything wrong anyone's ever done, you're not going to like anybody. You're not going to have that many people who want to be around you, because who can ever live up to that, right? Don't keep a record of wrongs. Absolutely keep a record of rights, keep a record of blessings, keep a record of gratitude. It is true that your focus determines your reality. Whatever it is you spend the most time thinking about is the thing that becomes the world you live in and inhabit. Y'all have heard me talk before some, I believe, about just the importance of the companions you choose. They say that in all these really amazing ways, just from in terms of career, finances, personality, habits, hobbies, you will be an average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so choose your companions well, because they're going to determine what you focus on, how you focus, and that becomes the world you live in. One of the phenomenons we've seen so much in the last few years is what Scott Adams would call one screen and 2 movies. So like all the political news, like here's an event that happened. This news network is going to spin it this way, and this news network is going to spin it the opposite way. And it's almost like, 2 people could be in a room and look at the very same screen, and it's like they saw 2 entirely different movies. Like they didn't even see the same thing. And so you get surrounded by people who think a certain way, and you're going to live into that. So you want to have healthier relationships, healthier habits, better you. Surround yourself with people who you want to be like, to the extent that they'll let you, right? Very important. Yeah, that's right, Sandy. People remember negatives so much better than we remember positives. And, something I've always struggled with, Sandy. I still, like randomly, I might just be getting ready in the morning and I'll have a memory of something I did to embarrass myself as a 3rd grader. And it's like I think about it all morning and it puts me in a bad mood. It's weird how it's so hard to let go of anytime you felt embarrassed or ashamed or, stuff like that. But you're right. And I don't have ready access to some of those studies, but just the same, what you focus on becomes your reality. So we have to work on developing habits and practices that help us to focus on good things. So I'm a big advocate for praying in any form, but really some specific types of meditative prayers where I've tried to get better at kind of emptying out the negative thoughts and focusing on something that's healthy for me. It's important. People are flawed. That's right, Joe. We're all flawed. So flawed people, the only kind you have to work with. So got to find a way to love them. And God certainly does. So these were the 4 red flags I wanted to mention. There were the harsh startup. So be careful about the harsh startup. Be careful about the 4 horsemen that we mentioned. Goodness, can I remember them off the top of my head? Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Be careful for those 4. When someone tries to repair, let them. Do what you can to meet them in the middle. If they're trying to meet you, come back. work on those repair attempts, and then also be careful about letting the bad memories dominate. Sorry, we're going to go just a tad over. I want to go ahead and try and get through this stuff. I've got just a few more points I'm trying to make here. Couples who never talk about their problems can end up devitalized with a devitalized marriage. So it is important to actually fight the good fight. You aren't fighting, but neither are you connecting. And so some couples might say, well, we're not arguing, but they have these really bland conversations. Well, how are you? Fine. How's work? It was all right. Do anything neat? Usual. And what happens is there might actually be some issue causing them to act distant. And if that is the case, to where the reason they're not talking much is because each of them does have something they're angry about, they might say, hey, give me the trophy. We're not fighting. But you might also not really be loving either. And so that's what they would call a devitalized marriage. So you kind of end up with this really bland, lukewarm, not meaningful connection because you're using up all your energy to repress your emotions. So important to really try and engage, even if it's a negative engagement. And as part of that, I just want to say briefly, choose your battles carefully. A lot of stuff's not worth fighting about. It's worth pausing to think, is this going to matter to me even next week, in a year from now, 2 years from now? Is this really that much of an issue? Some things are. And the things that are, you should engage. But there's a lot of stuff we just need to let go. And when someone else is maybe got a little angry too quick, we need to give them the grace to let them back off without having to get insulted or belittled. Always work on defining your issues specifically. So it's not, you just never do anything good. It's, hey, last night when you said you were going to do such and such, here's what actually happened. I would really like it if you would, And then also stating and rating your feelings clearly. So, I meant to share some stuff. There's some good stuff from there's a lady who has a book called Emotional Agility. Fantastic book. I would recommend. Susan something is her name, Emotional Agility. But she's got a Facebook fan page where she posts some really good content. But she was posting something a couple of days ago about under the emotion of sadness. Here's 15 different words you could use to describe sadness, or 15 words you could use to describe joy, and a way to help you express your emotions more precisely, because it does matter what words you use, but trying to be specific. A method that I recommend to people a lot in counseling, if you're getting frustrated, or maybe one of your partners, one of you is more expressive than the other, it might be helpful to use a scale of 1 to 10 and say, hey, I can see you're acting upset, but I'm trying to figure out how I can help you. I need to know this thing you're complaining about on a scale of 1 to 10. How much is this really a problem for you? From it's really nothing till, the world's going to fall apart if we don't do something. On a scale of 1 to 10, I need to know how you're really feeling so I can judge how I need to respond to you. And be precise. So in situation X, when you do Y, I feel Z. And maybe also, here's what I could use from you. Future weeks, we'll be talking a lot about what helps relationships go well. As I mentioned at the beginning, most of this class that we do over the next several weeks is going to be focused on what are good things we can do that help things to go well. But for the next 2 weeks, I want to speak specifically to those of you who are not necessarily in committed relationships, and you're trying to make decisions about, who's the kind of person I should be with, and how do I know if they're the right kind of person for me? How do I choose well before I let my heart get overly involved with a person? Because you don't want to end up in a situation where in the long run you frankly just marry a jerk. It happens. So we're going to spend a couple of weeks talking about that. And also want to mention, we would encourage you to like our Facebook page, King's Crossing COC, on there, King's Crossing Church of Christ. And then you can also go to that URL there at the bottom, rmd.at/KC Midweek. Sign up to get reminders before class goes live. So if you're wanting to try and participate with us live in these classes, would love to have you do that. And to, again, like our page. If you like this content, if you think this was useful to you, go ahead and share it. We would love to have you share this content. And this is a way we're trying to minister both to our congregation. We got a lot of members who have had to move away for various reasons who still tune in with us. And we love that you do that. It's great to see everyone. But if you find something helpful here and you think the people you're friends with on Facebook could use something other than angry political rants, here's another option, right? So feel free to share this content anywhere that you can. And as always, if you got questions, comments, I'd love to hear from you. Mark at kingscrossingcoc.com. And I will try to address as many of those as I can as they come in. So thank you so much for being here. I believe that's all I've got for this evening. And Yeah, I got several good comments. I'm a little long tonight, so I want to go ahead and wrap it up with a word of prayer. So if you would bow with me. Father, we thank you for our relationships, our friendships, the people who add so much richness to our lives. Pray that you help all of us, Lord, to show the same kind of grace to others that you show to us. Help us to be patient and kind, willing to forgive, willing to engage, Lord, that when we feel frustrated, that we would care so much about our relationships that we're not content to sit back and see ourselves divided over something that together we could work through and make better. So help us to be courageous, help us to be loving, and in all things give us wisdom, and especially give us your Holy Spirit to dwell within us, to help us grow in the fruit of the Spirit, so that we can be a pleasant person to live with, to work with, to be friends with, to be around. Thank you, Lord, and continue to go with us this week. We pray your special blessings on our nation and this new administration coming into power. Lord, it is our desire above all things to see your kingdom strengthened and expanded, and we pray that you'll be at work through this and every administration to lead more people to your kingdom. Help us to be good and quiet citizens who are dignified and godly in all that we do. These things we all pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Y'all have a wonderful evening, and hopefully, Lord willing, we will see you